It's always good to have a plan to know what we're going to do if certain things happen and to be thinking about what could happen and then what to know what we would do in certain situations. Um, because when we get into the middle of a difficult situation, it can be hard to make quick, snap decisions about what's the best thing to do. Um, and that's especially true in flying small float planes. I know one time I was talking to a pilot, and he was saying he always knows where he's going to land if something happens, like the engine would shut off, where would he go? And he's always thinking about that as he's flying. Another pilot told me that being a pilot is hours of boredom interrupted by moments of sheer terror. And I've flown lots of hours in small float planes, a lot of boring hours, and also a few moments of sheer terror. One of those was one time we were flying up north and we left Dryden. We were flying in Cessna 206 on floats, and it was the pilot and myself and Frank and Ada Yoder from Iowa. They would come and do photography for us. And so we were flying them up north, and the weather was not real good, but it was getting better. And we thought, we knew we would get to our destination that day, but the pilot said when we left, we might not get all the way there. We might have to land on a lake somewhere and wait for things to clear up a little bit. But the weather system is moving, and we'll get there before the end of the day. So we thought, well, we'll leave and we'll start making our way north. So we did, and we it was really windy. There was a strong wind from the west, and uh, we didn't get very far north of Dryden. We were just over Lac Seul, which is a big lake that goes from Sioux Lookout to Ear Falls and is probably, I don't know, 50, 60 miles long, and I don't know how wide, but we were, we got to Lac Seul and we were flying over Lac Seul, and the pilot um, wasn't sure. He got blown off course by the wind, and he wasn't quite sure where he was. He knew north and south that he was over Lac Seul, but east and west he wasn't quite sure where he was over Lac Seul. And just on the north side of Lac Seul, there was rain and fog and clouds right down to the trees, and so it didn't look good just north of Lac Seul. The other thing was that it was very rough. There was a lot of turbulence, and me, along with some of the other people that were flying, got motion sickness, were sick, and there wasn't enough of air sick bags in the plane for everybody who was sick. So we were looking for things for people to throw up into, and the pilot got into a bit of a panic, and he realized that he didn't quite know where he was. There was fog and rain down into the trees just north of Lac Seul, and people were throwing up, and we didn't have enough of things for people to throw up into, and so he decided he's just going to land. And from the air, uh, it looked, it didn't look like the waves were really big. Because on a big lake like Lac Seul, you can get rollers where the waves are rolling, but they're not breaking, so there's no white caps on top of the waves. That was the case on that day on Lac Seul. And the other thing he did was he just decided, I'm just gonna land, and he didn't set up an approach, pick out I mean, the whole lake is a runway for a float plane, so he's just going to get this thing down on the water and deal with the situation later. So he went in for land, and he didn't set up, go through all the proper setup for a landing, and he did a downwind landing, which is not a good idea. And when we got down close to the water, we could you could see the waves were like 3 feet high. They weren't breaking. And in a small plane, that's not a good scenario at all because if you get sideways in 3 foot waves, it'll just flip the plane. Well, we got down and we hit that first wave and we bounced off of it and we hit another wave and bounced off of it. And the plane would crack. And every time we'd hit the wave, I'm not sure how many waves we hit, but and then the pilot decided he's just going to get out of here. And so he pulled the throttle back and gave it full throttle. And but because we were going downwind, it wasn't going to work because we had lost too much airspeed already. And then, but when he did that, the nose of the plane came up and the tail went down, and we hit the next wave at the right angle, and the plane just kind of stuck to it. So he cut the throttle. There we were, bobbing in these waves, and we couldn't turn. And so we just kept going and going. This lake is miles. We kept going and going, and gradually he inched his way over to the left, to the north side. And eventually we got over enough behind an island that the waves were smaller and he could turn the plane, and we went back into a bay and parked the plane. We got out. Oh, we laid on the bank and we're like, oh, we were all sick. And eventually we got our stomachs straightened out and the weather started clearing up, and the pilot was saying, okay, there you go. And Frank was saying to me, well, like, I don't know if I want to get back in that plane. Like the way we hit those waves and the way that things were cracking. I mean, there could be something cracked in there, and we take off. One of the wings could come off or something. And well, Frank, the only way out of here is in that plane. We're on the north shore of Lac Seul, and it's a long walk out of here through the bush, and we wouldn't be able to find our way. So uh, I don't think the pilot wants to die, and so if he's getting back in that plane, I'm going to get back in with him. Eventually, the weather cleared up enough, and we got back in the plane and we took off. We got to our destination. Everything was fine. But it was one of those moments that was a reminder. It's always good to have a plan and then to follow your plan, especially when you get into a difficult or an emergency situation.